Beneath the gleaming marble columns and triumphant arches of ancient Rome lay secrets so dark, so twisted, that they would make even the most hardened modern observer recoil in our centuries. We've romanticized the Roman Empire as a pinnacle of civilization, law and order. But what if I told you that behind those magnificent facades lurked practices so brutal, so depraved, that they were hidden even from Roman citizens themselves? Today, we're peeling back the layers of carefully constructed propaganda to reveal 10 secrets that Rome's rulers desperately wanted to keep buried. These aren't just tales of political intrigue or military conquest. These are the darkest chapters of human nature, written in blood on the pages of history. Our journey into Rome's shadows begins with one of its most notorious rulers, Nero. While history remembers him for supposedly fiddling while Rome burned, the truth about his reign contains horrors far more calculated and personal. In the imperial palace, Nero maintained what can only be described as a human laboratory of suffering. Historical accounts from Tacitus and Suetonius describe how the emperor would invite guests to elaborate dinner parties, only to use them as unwitting subjects in his experiments with exotic poisons. The dining halls of the Domus Aurea became theaters of slow, agonizing death, where Nero would observe with scientific fascination as his victims succumbed to carefully administered toxins. He kept detailed records of symptoms, timing, and effectiveness, all while maintaining the pretense of imperial hospitality. The most chilling aspect wasn't the murders themselves, but the methodical, almost clinical way Nero documented each death, treating human lives as mere data points in his twisted research. Long before the Colosseum echoed with the roars of spectators, Rome's very foundations were laid with a practice so horrifying that it was whispered about only in the darkest corners of the city. Archaeological evidence has revealed that major construction projects, bridges, aqueducts, and temples often involved human sacrifice rituals performed by the college of priests known as the pontifices. These weren't quick, merciful deaths, but elaborate ceremonies where victims were buried alive within the foundation walls, their screams considered a blessing that would ensure the structure's longevity. Recent excavations beneath the Forum Romanum have uncovered skeletal remains positioned in ritualistic poses, their bones bearing evidence of having been interred while still alive. The practice, known as devotia, was so embedded in Roman engineering that architects would specifically design hidden chambers within foundations to accommodate these living sacrifices. What makes this even more disturbing is that these victims were often volunteers, citizens who believed their suffering would grant them immortality and divine favor, willingly descending into tombs that would become their eternal prisons. While the Praetorian Guard is often portrayed as the emperor's elite bodyguards, few know about their most sinister division, the Frumentary. Operating under the cover of grain distribution officials, these agents formed Rome's first secret police force, conducting surveillance and elimination operations that would make modern intelligence agencies seem benign by comparison. The Frumentary maintained a network of informants so extensive that it's estimated 1 in every 10 Roman citizens was either an agent or an informant. They operated from seemingly innocent bakeries and markets, using the empire's grain distribution system as cover for their true mission: identifying and eliminating anyone deemed a threat to imperial power. Their methods were particularly cruel. They specialized in making their victims simply disappear, often replacing them with lookalikes who would gradually alter the victim's reputation and relationships before the substitution was discovered. Families would live for years with imposters, never knowing their loved ones had been taken. The psychological torture of these operations was intentional, designed to create an atmosphere of paranoia where no one could trust even their closest relatives. Perhaps the most horrifying secret of ancient Rome was institutionalized infanticide on a scale that defies comprehension. While exposure of unwanted babies is often mentioned in historical texts as a regrettable but common practice, recently discovered administrative records reveal a systematic program that went far beyond individual family decisions. The Roman state maintained what they euphemistically called child quality assessment centers, where newborns were evaluated not just for physical defects, but for more subjective criteria, including behavioral predictions based on primitive physiological measurements. Babies who failed these assessments weren't simply abandoned. They were collected en masse and used in what can only be described as industrial-scale human experimentation. Medical papyri found in Egyptian archives describe procedures where thousands of infants were subjected to surgical experiments, poison testing, and anatomical studies, all conducted by physicians who saw these unwanted children as readily available research subjects. The program was so extensive that it required dedicated facilities and staff, creating an entire bureaucracy built around the systematic destruction of human life in the name of advancing medical knowledge and maintaining social order. The gladiatorial games that thrilled Roman audiences had a supply chain more horrific than any modern factory farm. Beyond the traditional sources of gladiators, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals, Rome operated breeding facilities specifically designed to produce fighters from birth. These installations, scattered across the empire but concentrated in rural areas away from public scrutiny, housed thousands of women whose sole purpose was reproduction. Children born in these facilities never knew freedom. They were evaluated at birth and assigned roles based on physical characteristics. Those deemed suitable for the arena were separated from their mothers immediately and raised in isolation, trained in combat from the moment they could walk. The psychological conditioning was as brutal as the physical training. Children were taught to view other humans as prey, their empathy systematically destroyed through techniques that would later be recognized as sophisticated psychological torture. What makes this even more disturbing is the discovery of detailed breeding records showing deliberate genetic manipulation, where the Romans attempted to create superior fighters by controlling which gladiators could reproduce, treating human beings like livestock in their pursuit of more entertaining blood sport. One of Rome's most insidious practices involved the systematic erasure of inconvenient histories through a process called damnatio memoria. But this went far beyond simply removing names from monuments. Recently translated administrative documents reveal an organized effort to manipulate collective memory on an unprecedented scale. Specialized scribes, working in teams across the empire, would simultaneously alter historical records, literature, and even private correspondence to create entirely fabricated versions of events. Citizens would wake up to find that wars they remembered had officially never happened, that leaders they had supported were declared to have never existed, and that their memories were contradicted by every written record they could find. The psychological impact was devastating. People began to doubt their sanity when their recollections consistently conflicted with official history. This wasn't just political revisionism. It was a calculated assault on human consciousness itself. The most chilling aspect was the discovery of memory adjustment centers, where citizens who persisted in maintaining incorrect memories were subjected to a combination of drugs, sensory deprivation, and repetitive conditioning designed to reprogram their recollections of past events. The Vestal Virgins, celebrated as Rome's most sacred priestesses, harbored secrets that would shatter their pristine reputation. Archaeological excavations beneath the House of the Vestals have revealed a hidden network of chambers containing evidence of practices that pervert every principle they supposedly represented. These underground facilities contained elaborate torture chambers where the Vestals conducted interrogations for the state, using their sacred status as cover for intelligence, gathering operations that were too sensitive for regular officials. The discovery of specialized medical instruments suggests they also performed illegal surgical procedures, possibly including early forms of lobotomy on political prisoners. Most disturbing of all, skeletal remains found in these chambers belong to infants and young children, arranged in ritualistic patterns that suggest the Vestals were involved in child sacrifice ceremonies, far more extensive and systematic than any previously imagined. The evidence points to a dual existence where these women maintained their public image of purity and devotion, while operating one of Rome's most brutal clandestine networks. The irony is profound. The very women charged with maintaining Rome's sacred flame were simultaneously extinguishing human lives in the darkness below their temple. During the Antonine Plague that devastated the empire in the 2nd century CE, Roman military engineers didn't just struggle to contain the disease. They weaponized. Classified military documents discovered in Syrian archives reveal a systematic effort to cultivate and deploy infectious diseases as biological weapons against enemy populations. The Romans established what can only be described as early bioweapons laboratories, where captured plague victims were studied and their infections were deliberately concentrated and preserved. These facilities produced infected materials that were then deployed through various delivery methods. Contaminated water supplies, infected corpses catapulted into besieged cities, and even infected animals released into enemy territory. The scale of these operations was massive, requiring coordination between military engineers, physicians, and logistics specialists across multiple provinces. What makes this particularly horrifying is that the Romans understood they were unleashing suffering that would spread far beyond their intended targets, affecting innocent civilians, including children. They calculated these casualties as acceptable losses in their pursuit of military advantage, creating what may have been history's first systematic biological warfare program. Beneath the famous Colosseum lies a secret that Roman authorities went to extraordinary lengths to conceal: an entire underground arena, complex dedicated exclusively to children's combat. This subterranean facility, accessible only through hidden passages, hosted gladiatorial games featuring children as young as 6 years old, fighting both each other and wild animals for the entertainment of Rome's elite. The audience for these events wasn't the general public, but rather wealthy Romans who paid enormous sums for the privilege of watching these private spectacles. Archaeological evidence reveals that this underground arena was larger and more elaborate than the main Colosseum above, featuring sophisticated hydraulic systems, exotic animal holding areas, and luxurious viewing boxes. The children who fought here weren't criminals or prisoners of war. They were specifically procured for these events, often kidnapped from conquered territories or purchased from desperate families. Training records show that these young gladiators were subjected to conditioning techniques designed to suppress their natural fear and reluctance to kill, creating child warriors who fought with a ruthlessness that thrilled their adult audiences. Roman military medicine achieved remarkable advances, but the price was paid in human suffering on an industrial scale. What historians had previously attributed to natural medical progress was the result of systematic human experimentation, conducted in facilities disguised as military hospitals. These installations, scattered along the empire's frontiers, served a dual purpose: treating wounded soldiers and conducting medical experiments on expendable subjects. Captured enemies, condemned criminals, and slaves were subjected to surgical procedures, poison trials, and anatomical studies that pushed the boundaries of medical knowledge through methods that violated every principle of human dignity. Medical papyri describe procedures where live subjects were systematically dissected to study organ function. Infections were deliberately introduced to test treatment methods, and surgical techniques were practiced on conscious victims without any form of anesthesia. The knowledge gained from these experiments directly contributed to Rome's military medical superiority, saving the lives of Roman soldiers while sacrificing thousands of non-Roman lives in the pursuit of medical advancement. In their quest to create perfect soldiers and citizens, Roman administrators developed early forms of psychological manipulation that bordered on mind control. Special facilities, disguised as training camps and schools, were established to experiment with techniques for breaking down human personality and rebuilding it according to state specifications. Subjects were isolated from all familiar contacts and exposed to carefully controlled environments designed to destabilize their sense of identity. Through a combination of sensory deprivation, repetitive conditioning, chemical substances, and social manipulation, Roman psychologists, for that's essentially what they were, attempted to create individuals who would be loyal to the state and incapable of independent thought. The success of these programs is evidenced by the emergence of fanatically devoted imperial servants who seem to have no personal desires or concerns beyond serving Rome. What makes this even more disturbing is that many of the subjects were volunteers, Roman citizens who sought advancement in imperial service and willingly underwent these procedures, never fully understanding what they were surrendering in exchange for imperial favor. For centuries, archaeologists and historians have been complicit in concealing the full extent of Rome's dark secrets, either through willful ignorance or active suppression of inconvenient discoveries. Recent whistleblower accounts from archaeological teams reveal a systematic effort to hide evidence that would contradict the sanitized version of Roman history promoted in academic institutions and popular culture. Discoveries of mass graves containing evidence of systematic torture, facilities designed for human experimentation, and artifacts that document practices too horrific for public consumption have been either reclassified as inconclusive or simply removed from official records. This cover-up extends to the highest levels of international archaeological organizations, with evidence suggesting that certain finds have been deliberately destroyed rather than risking public exposure. The motivation appears to be a combination of academic politics, tourism concerns, and a paternalistic belief that the public couldn't handle the truth about one of history's most celebrated civilizations. The most disturbing aspect of these revelations isn't that they happened 2,000 years ago, but that many of the techniques and systems developed by Rome continue to influence modern institutions and practices. The bureaucratic structures used to administer systematic human rights abuses, the propaganda techniques employed to manipulate public memory, and the psychological conditioning methods used to create unquestioning obedience can all be traced directly to innovations pioneered in ancient Rome. Intelligence agencies, military organizations, and even corporate structures still employ methods that were perfected in Roman experimental facilities. The efficiency and scale of Roman atrocities provided blueprints that would later be adapted and expanded by subsequent regimes throughout history. Understanding these connections isn't just an academic exercise. It's essential for recognizing how seemingly civilized societies can harbor the capacity for systematic evil, and how historical legitimacy can be used to mask ongoing injustices. As we emerge from this journey into Rome's darkness, we're left with uncomfortable questions about the nature of civilization itself. If Rome, celebrated for its laws, engineering, and culture, was capable of such systematic horrors, what does that tell us about human nature and the societies we build? These weren't aberrations or the actions of a few disturbed individuals. They were institutionalized practices that required the participation and complicity of thousands of people across all levels of Roman society. The efficiency and scale of these operations reveal a capacity for organized evil that challenges our assumptions about progress and human development. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that these practices weren't hidden because Romans found them morally objectionable, but because they understood that knowledge of them would undermine the mythology that held their empire together. The real horror isn't just what the Romans did, but how successfully they convinced history to forget it. If these revelations have shaken your understanding of ancient history, share this video with others who deserve to know the truth. Subscribe for more investigations into the hidden histories that powerful institutions prefer to keep buried. And remember, the past isn't as distant as we'd like to believe. The capacity for both greatness and horror that defined Rome lives within us all. And only by confronting these dark truths can we hope to build a future worthy of our highest aspirations, rather than our deepest fears.